To guide you through this module, it is my pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues, Professor Sara of the Stockholm School of Economics. She is the holder of the Jacob and Marcus Wallenberg Chair in Innovative and Sustainable Business Development, and Associate Professor Anders Richtnér, who is also the CEO of SSE Executive Education.
So on receiving the Global Award for Entrepreneurship in Sweden in 2018 for his work in showing how entrepreneurial activity and innovation are strongly embedded in socially and spatially bounded relationships, Olof Sorensen spoke of his strong belief that entrepreneurs want to start businesses in the places that they know, and much less so in the Silicon Valleys of the world. Our being fixed on Silicon Valley and the models of business and entrepreneurship this has offered us has skewed how we often see entrepreneurship as being something represented by gazelles and unicorns, when actually for the majority of everyday entrepreneurs, its reality is something much more ordinary and mundane, and about surviving, often in conditions of uncertainty and in a way which helps places and communities really survive. So what we are seeing today is that regions across the world are developing national and often regional innovation strategies to take advantage of emerging opportunities and market developments, but also to build competitive advantage. Now, social innovation is an activity that comprises the creation of reconfigured social arrangements or networks between diverse actors, including civil society, which may involve the creation of new institutions or governance arrangements in the hope that enhanced development outcomes with respect to economy, society, or environment, or any combination thereof, might arise. Now, social innovation can bring new solutions to problems in, for example, rural areas, which must reinvent their role and their capacity to innovate in order to survive. However, much remains to be done to link social innovations with desired policy outcomes. However, in doing so, it is essential to consider local conditions and various intermediate factors, to use social innovations for the development of regions and to help make them smart. In many rural areas, for example, social innovation is often a driver of local development. But many rural areas, especially those considered marginalised, face difficulties such as declining and ageing populations, as well as agricultural, environmental and social challenges. And social innovation can introduce new solutions to these challenges. And social innovation is seen as the reconfiguring of social practices in response to societal challenges, which seeks to enhance outcomes on societal well-being and necessarily includes the engagement of civil society actors. But social innovation also means connectedness, and that connectedness is often the driver which makes regions smart. That connectedness is usually driven through interactions and connections to others. And this is often how innovations are created. But increasingly, this process of reconnecting is reliant on digital tools and technology to make things happen. And as technology has moved forward, what this also means is that people are more able to start a business in the places that they really want to live. As long as they are connected or can be connected, they can reach out to others in the world and make regions smart. Anders, have you got anything you want to add?
Well, thank you so much, Sara. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. I think it's an amazing opportunity to dig into the question of what is the smart region and how are these created, and Sara was started to talk about social innovation. I think that on a fundamental level, it boils down to a simple question: a hope for a better life. I'm very curious of the topic as of today and what we will see. In particular, I look forward to, because we know that a lot of things is happening in the world, and I'm thinking of the research from the London School of Economics, on the Urban Age Project, which has projected that 75% of the world's population will in 2050 live in an urban area. So I think that there are layers of issues that we need to think about and look into. One is obviously what is the role of entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and scale-up ecosystem? How do that create to the development of a certain region? I also think it's important to look a little bit into yourself. What is my role, and basically what is everyone's role in creating these regions? But also what we need to address is also what are the challenges and risks going forward? And we're going to touch upon these issues during the day and during the hours we have ahead of us. So I look forward to an interesting and fruitful conversation around talent, technology, and tolerance, and with a hope for a better life. And I'll leave it to Sara to introduce to you all our next or our first speaker. Sara.
Thank you. So in dealing with smart regions, I am delighted to present Professor Daniel Isenberg as our keynote speaker. And Professor Isenberg is the president of Entrepreneurship Policy Advisors and Entrepreneurship Professor at Columbia Business School and Babson Executive Education. Professor Isenberg is also the founder and director of the Babson Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Platform, an initiative that implements, along with coalitions of regional leaders, the policy, structures, programs and climates that foster growth in entrepreneurship. He has demonstrated through a decade of practical applications that entrepreneurs, when they grow, enable regional prosperity. Welcome, Professor Isenberg.
Okay, thank you very much. Because I could not hear you, but now I can hear you. That's fine. So it's my pleasure to be here with you today. I hope you can hear me and you can see me reasonably well. It's about 6 in the morning here, so it's still a little bit dark, as you can see my background. I'm going to talk today about what I call scale-up ecosystems. And the reason is, and it touches on the few introductory words that I heard from you, it touches on, I think, is essential for helping to create broad-based prosperity in our societies. I think that it's not one of the three T's, but I think it's still a contributing element. And I have three topics that I'll cover within that this afternoon, your time. The first will be, I want to identify some of the issues or problems or dilemmas that are wrapped up in what I call entrepreneurship policy, because many of us believe, and I think you'll see with a little bit of misconception, that entrepreneurship can be an important element in driving broad-based prosperity, especially economic prosperity. Number two, I will present scaling up, which is basically growth as what I think is the evidence shows now, I think, that it's a useful organizing principle. And then thirdly, I want to present a specific methodology, and that'll be most of my talk, of how to actually implement it. Of course, this is only 40 minutes or so, so I'm going to be compacting 12 years now of practice into just a few minutes. But 11 years ago, we started off with a very an ambitious project, and that is to learn how entrepreneurship can impact society in a very strong and positive way, but to do so in a way that's rapid, that it's robust, and it's replicable, and it's real in the sense that it's applicable to broad number of societies, not just elite regions in the world. And that it's results oriented. This was our ambition almost 12 years ago as we started. But we realized along the way, very, very early on with some projects we did in the field, that we really had to change some of our cherished beliefs and the beliefs we hold dearest to our hearts about what entrepreneurship is and how it works. And the first belief that we confronted is that the term entrepreneurship is used for so many different things, and it really cannot usefully mean everything. All the ways in which people use the term entrepreneurship, in fact, as you'll see, some of them are mutually exclusive. They're contradictory. The more of one, the less of the other. So there's a big problem. And I'll digress for 30 seconds just to show the importance or illustrate the importance of words, because words are tools. We use them to accomplish things, and they have practical implications. Here are 4 pictures of hammers, but you wouldn't want to get confused because they're good for different things. You can't drive a nail if you want to play a concerto on a piano, or you can't build a house by driving a nail with a gun. So you have to get it straight. And similarly, not all entrepreneurship can drive societies. Not all entrepreneurship can drive prosperity. Well, this is what I want to open up with a little bit today. And the second thing that we learned that was very important and changed our practice in a lot of ways, it's useful to have, and not right or wrong, but it's useful to have an obsessive focus. I use the word obsessive focus, a very highly concentrated focus on new growth. And that's very different from the current dialogue. Rather than help create more and more startups or new firms, you have to create more and more local firms with new growth, regardless of their age, their sector. There has to be a dynamic of growth. And the word local is very important here. Come back to that. So in that context, there are 4 problems we have to dispel, or myths and issues we have to dispel with when you think about applying entrepreneurship policy to the problem of creating more and more local growth and more local firms in order to get broader-based prosperity. And the 4 problems, you can see them listed here: startup, small business, self-employment, innovation. 4 of the meanings of entrepreneurship. And very quickly, again, because I do want to have some conversations with you. This is just a typical initiative of a startup project in New York City, in which after $53 million were spent, a few hundred jobs had been created. It's largely regarded as a failure if job creation is the objective, which it was. This is an auditor's report, not my report. And that's typical of all the startup projects around the world. When you actually measure their impact, there isn't any. And that's related to a particular dilemma. You'd think that, of course, that the more entrepreneurship you have, why are we doing this? Entrepreneurship is related somehow to healthy economies, correct? And so let's take a look and use some of the accepted measurements of healthy economies, one of which is the World Economic Forum. You all know very well the National Competitiveness Ranking. And there's a very well-known accepted measurement called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And of course, you think that entrepreneurship leads to competitiveness, right? The more entrepreneurship you have, the more competitive, healthy, stronger your economy is. And you'd be absolutely right in your belief that there is a very, very strong relationship, but you'd be absolutely wrong and that the relationship is strongly negative. In other words, the accepted measures of entrepreneurship and accepted measures of healthy economies are strongly negatively correlated. I didn't make this up. This is just an empirical correlation. Looking a little bit differently at 2 other indices. One is the well-known Kauffman Foundation. They're the most famous entrepreneurship philanthropy in the world, in the United States, but also outside. They have a startup index. And of course, Dun & Bradstreet, a famous rating organization, created something with American Express called the Mid-Market Index. So basically, your theory would be the more startups, why do we want startups? We want them because they're going to grow. And so the more startups we have, then some will make it through and we'll have mid-sized, healthy, big employers, taxpayers, and so on and so forth. And again, you'd be absolutely right in that there's a relationship, but you'd be absolutely wrong in that the relationship, as far as we can measure it, again, the places where there are lots of startups, there are fewer mid-sized companies, and vice versa. So these are clearly issues. Now, in terms of small business, this is again an empirical finding from some OECD data. of where the small businesses are in the OECD countries. And you can see, of course, that the Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, you all know the acronym. They have very large numbers of small businesses, and where these other quite healthy economies have very few numbers of small businesses, relatively speaking. So this is a problem. Self-employment, it's very clear that if you correlate self-employment with national GDP, then you find an extremely negative, this is from a Gallup study, not quite as pretty, but this is the Gallup study, which shows very clearly the negative relationship between self-employment and national GDP. And I realize I may be upsetting some of your notions right here, but in general, self-employment pays poorly, gives you low job security, low benefits, longer hours, lower wages, accident rates are higher, and so on and so forth. These are just empirical. This is not something that I made up. These are empirical findings that are well known. Now, more problematic is innovation. And of course, no one can say anything bad about innovation. It's a little bit like motherhood and apple pie. It's all has to be good. Well, now I think people are starting to question some of the social externalities of certain kinds of innovation. But one of the problems with innovation is that if you really look at most of the things we use in our lives, most of the new things that happen, most of them in fact come from big companies. That's not to say that some of them don't come from smaller firms, but most of the innovation, in fact, that we use in our lives, these are just some examples. If you take away information technology and you throw away your smartphone or your PC, basically everything else you use is relatively old, 20, 30 years old, basically, with some exceptions. And I know that doesn't sound very sexy these days, but it's, again, empirical. We correlated a particular measure of transformativeness with age, and you'd think with all the talk about innovative and transformative startups that you'd think there'd be some relationship, and in fact, there's absolutely no relationship between, this is an index of transformativeness created by the Harvard Business Review in an article of 3 or 4 years ago. There's absolutely no correlation between the age of a company and how transformative its business model is. Now, there's a third problem with innovation, and that is that it tends to be highly where you have innovation tends to be highly correlated with inequality of various kinds. Not completely, but there is a strong tendency where you see patenting activity, venture capital investments, and other kinds of indicators related to innovativeness. You see fairly high degrees of inequality and growing inequality. So there's some problems with innovation. And by the way, in parentheses, what wasn't said about me in the introduction is I'm a very active investor in small, innovative startups. I have 18 companies that I've invested, made about 60 investments. So it's not that I don't like startups, I love them, but that's my private business. Doesn't make it, just because I like to do it, doesn't make it good policy. So where are we if we can't, we have problems with startups? And I think the solution, and here we get into scaling up, it's not right or wrong, but if you treat that aspect of entrepreneurship that grows, and you only look at entrepreneurship that grows, at growth. In fact, if you define entrepreneurship as extraordinary growth of some kind, you actually can get some practical leverage in making change, and that is creating environments in which more and more local firms can grow more and more rapidly. Those words are all chosen carefully. In fact, there is some evidence that if you look at cities in the United States or urban regions in the United States, those regions which have had sustained growth over a long and consistent growth over a long period of time have very vibrant business sectors where lots of firms are growing, especially smaller firms. They're actually growing. Growth seems to be the critical factor. And I will digress here again just for 1 or 2 slides and mention a few words about my view of what a healthy local economy looks like. And it's a healthy local economy is a very dynamic place. it's a very heterogeneous place. A lot of our policies segment and discriminate in favor of this sector or that sector. And but the healthy the healthy business ecosystems tend to have a huge variety of flora and fauna, great diversity, and a great connectivity as well among the different firms and between or among private sector institutions and non-private sector institutions. So there's a rich fabric, and to take out just the startups or take out just the small businesses, it goes against the reality that these are all interconnected. In fact, if you look at those regions in which there are quite a lot of technology startups, I lived in Israel for 22 years, and I built a company and invested there as well. And in it, you cannot separate out the startup nation from the scale-up nation from the big company nation. The reality is these are all very tightly interconnected. If you look at Silicon Valley or Boston, in the beginning, there were big companies, not startups. And I can explain that in detail. In fact, if you look at some of these examples, and I've just taken a few examples of what we would call scale-up companies or companies that are growing and from different sectors, one of them, just as an example, which would never be put out there as an exciting or a model for our societies. It's a. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. This is a restaurant chain called Legal Seafood, which was founded 60 years ago or so, actually longer, by a grandfather, turned into from a grocery store to a fish store to a restaurant, slowly grew, taken over by the second generation, grew significantly into a massive change, and then about 15 years ago began to innovate in many different new kinds of concepts of restaurateur. And they employ lots of people, pay lots of taxes, they're important in the local culture, etc. Another example, just an example, a third generation company that's now maybe you know it, it's a Danish company not too far away in Midtjylland. And it was a third generation metalworking shop, which was taken over by the grandson, reluctantly, I might add. And he grew it from a 7-person metal shop into a world leader in making little motors that move desks up and down in hospital beds and so on and so forth. Many, many thousands of employees. This was several years ago. Another Nordic example. Doesn't have to happen in 3 generations. It can happen in just a few years. This is a generics pharmaceutical company, not innovative at all. Founded by in Iceland by Robert Westman, and they grew incredibly rapidly over 6 or 7 years to quite a few billions of sales and quite a few thousands of people. And if you look at Apple Corporation's history, it's quite interesting. But one thing that's very clear from the numbers, I didn't make this up, that is that all of Apple's value was created after it was 25 years old. Until it was 25 years old, it was a niche player, kicked out the CEO. The CEO came back. 12 years he was gone. 7 years after he came back, that's when Apple really started to grow. So what do we know about companies that do grow? And this is just some of the research that's been done by a number of different institutions, including the Enterprise Research Center in the UK. First of all, scaling up growth can happen in companies of all ages. There's nothing special about young, except for that young, when you're 0, a baby doubles its weight in the first 3 months. All startups grow if they don't die. They have to. From 1 to 2 people is 100% growth, but it's not very meaningful. It can happen in all sectors. It's not the province of information technology or life sciences. It can grow in real estate, in retail, in logistics, in manufacturing, finance, and so on, financial services. Most of scaling up, most of growth occurs, it's financed by customers and credit. Now, I have a lot to say about venture capital, and I've been a venture capitalist. I don't think I've done everything. In fact, I've done a lot of things. I've been a general partner of a large venture capital fund in Israel, and I'm invested in 3 venture capital funds. But that's a very small slice of the total entrepreneurship, an important one, but a very small slice. Most firms grow without any venture capital at all. That's, again, an empirical fact. Fourth, scaling up happens not in a smooth way. It's not a smooth, like you get an idea, you start a company, you raise some money, you get your first customers, then you grow, and then you keep growing. That's not the way the real life works. You can grow for 1 or 2 years and then decline for 1 or 2 years, and grow another year and decline, and grow for 5 years and decline for 2. That's the way real life works in the business world. And then finally, a very surprising fact, which I think is very, very important. If you take a company with 0 revenues, a startup, and a company with $1 million, whatever, let's say euro of revenues, and you look 3 years later, the chances of the 0 company growing to $1 million in revenues and the 1 million company growing to 2 million in revenues, it's about 3 times. In other words, it's about 3 times easier to take a company that already has some business activity and increase it. So think about that in terms of where we want to spend our investment. So this leads into the third part of my presentation, which is to present to you the bare bones, the skeleton of an intervention methodology, because we've developed these ideas not sitting in our offices or in our labs or at our computers, but actually out in the field, working with societies all around the world in trying to help them grow. So this methodology is born out of practice, not out of theory. And again, the mantra is, the guiding principle is not growing more and more new firms. That happens, by the way, but it's a secondary and tertiary phenomenon. It's not a driver. It's not in the critical path. The growing, creating a system, we call it an ecosystem, in which more and more local firms can grow more and more rapidly. And that's a mantra. I'll say it 1 or 2 more times. It's because I think it's a very powerful guiding principle. So again, oversimplifying, there are 4 foci of intervention that are necessary and sufficient in a given location to strengthen, catalyze, stimulate an ecosystem of growth. And these are the 4, and I want to just touch on each one of these 4. We call them pillars. And we have intervention methodology. I want to give you a sense of what we do in each one of these 4 pillars. And again, pillar 1, the purpose is to demonstrate that growth can happen quickly here, wherever here is, whether it's Malmo or some other place, or Timbuktu. And we've developed something called the Scalerator, the purpose of which is to show that companies that you never thought could grow. This is very important, actually. And I'll just give you a taste of the Scalerator. It's about 100 contact hours. There are 15 to 20 companies participate, about 100 people altogether, 60 to 100 people altogether. They do lots of different things, but it's all hacking growth. It's what the young people call hacking growth. So it's creating the quick wins over and over and over again to show that growth is possible. And what's interesting, we've now run 20 some of these Scalerators, and they all have the same results. Overall, about $1 billion by now of what we call economic engagement has been created by these companies. There are now about 400 graduates. Almost all of them have immediate growth events within just a few weeks in the program, and they go on to double their growth rates eventually. And they're in all sectors, as I described earlier. The organizing principle or the common element is the ambition to grow and the scalable business model. But again, just a reminder that the purpose of this Scalerator is to create the role models, to create the stories, to spread the learning about growth. It's not to help those 15 or 20 companies grow, but it's to spill over. This word spillover that economists use, we use it as a verb. Spilling over is a verb. You can actively spill over their growth. And that's what the other pillars, the other 3 pillars do. I want to emphasize that the Scalerator, it's not very selective by design, because its purpose is to show that growth is possible. Taking 1 out of 1,000 or 1 out of 100 and showing they can grow is no big deal. The 1 out of 100 of anything will do well. The top 1% will always do well, no matter what it is. The question is the middle 20%. And so we take the middle 20% and show the middle 20% can grow. So it's very unselective. The second pillar is demonstrating that growth, communicating that growth. Once you've demonstrated it, to show it to other people. And this is that spilling over the effect of that growth. By the way, all this is happening locally. It's very important. Ecosystems are local. I'll touch on that in a minute. And it's a little bit like the conundrum you all know about. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Similarly, if growth happens in your community and nobody knows about it, does it have an impact? And I'll illustrate this with a personal story. I'll make a confession. It's 6:15 in the morning. If I weren't giving this presentation, I would be out fishing right now. I live near a small fishing village. I have a boat about 5 minutes away. The moon is still out, and that means the fish are biting. But I'm giving a presentation to you instead of fishing. But I'll show you what I usually do at 5 or 6 in the morning. So I'm out fishing by myself. And you're always asking yourself a question. Probably some of you had this experience. You're out in the water. You're all by yourself. No one is crazy enough like you to be out there with you. But that's when the fish eat. So, and you're there for an hour or two, no fish. You haven't caught anything. And there's a calculus going on. Should I keep fishing or should I go home and go to sleep or have some breakfast like a normal person? And something happens then which completely changes the calculus of your investment in fishing. A boat shows up just like your boat in the same waters at the same time as your boat, and they catch a fish. How do you think that impacts my calculus of do I keep fishing or not? Well, you can be sure that I'm going to stay at least a few more minutes because now I know there are fish there. Now I see there's a potentially positive payoff to my investment in continuing to fish. So I try harder. And, sometimes then I'll actually get lucky and catch a fish. That's a real fish. I caught another one like it just 2 days ago. So this little fish story illustrates the important demonstrative element or demonstrating element of growth happening and communicating that growth. So the purpose of systems, and it has to be systematized, the purpose or the outcomes of doing this increases ambition, because if you now see other people growing, you'll have the ambition to grow. I can also talk to you about what did you use to catch that fish? How did you fish? What equipment? It spreads the knowledge and skills and shows where the resources are that allow me to grow my company. Now, this is not a guarantee of growth, but without trying, without putting your fish rod in the water, you will not catch a fish. That I can guarantee you. So there's good news and bad news about communicating growth because it sounds very simple. And at first, when I started doing this, I really did think it was simple, but I realized that there's some bad news, and that is it's not. It's an unnatural act. And for quite a few reasons, which I won't go into now, in every society in the world, every single society that I've been to, there's a lack of communicating about growth. Communicating about a lot of other things, but not about growth. And there are a lot of reasons for this. I've listed some of them here. But one of which is we've never really learned what I call real growth looks like. And we've been taught, and here I'm going to take a little bit of a run at the unicorns, because I'm sure you've heard it. You probably talk about it. I've talked about it. And unicorns are very problematic. Unicorns are billion-dollar paper value companies that their value is determined completely by investors. Their only purpose in life is to be exit-driven. They serve the investors. As a result, they create a few very wealthy shareholders. I have other slides I can show you how concentrated that group of 10, 15, 20 investors is that keeps getting wealthy from investing in the unicorns. And of course, they have this glamour. And that's one of the ways we talk about growth. And you'll hear your leaders and our leaders talk about how many unicorns do we have, whether it's Stockholm or anywhere else. And this, I think, is very detrimental for these reasons. Not that they shouldn't happen. Of course they happen. I hope my investments become unicorns, but it's a market phenomenon. Just because I like to fish doesn't mean that fishing is a good policy. Just because I want my investments to be unicorns doesn't make it good policy. There's an alternative, which I call workhorses. And this is the reality. The workhorses exist. They're not mythical. And they're out there plowing the fields day after day. They strengthen local supply chains. Because there are lots of them, they spread the wealth more than the unicorns do. And they create something of real tangible value. This is 99% of the business world is workhorses. And there, I think the real engines of growth. Some of them may grow horns in their heads and become unicorns. So the third pillar, again, just in interest of moving on and maybe having some time for Q&A, I want to say a few words about engaging the stakeholders or sparking stakeholder engagement, which is the third pillar. And what you see in front of you is a very simple, sometimes I call it a cartoon, I invented it. This has become kind of the de facto way of talking about entrepreneurship ecosystems because it's multidimensional. The ecosystems are created by not just by entrepreneurs, but by access to finance, to markets, to large companies, to talent, having a culture that encourages wealth creation and success and innovation, policies that support all the above. And of course, there are many organizations such as these conferences which support entrepreneurship as well, directly or indirectly. And these domains, we call these the 6 domains, these are made up of people, they're actual people. And it's very important that this is another dimension of richness or heterogeneity that's very important. I mentioned in a previous slide the importance of heterogeneity, different flora and fauna within the business sector. Well, it's also important that business sector has connections with all kinds of different institutions that have connections with each other. These are essential for the formation of an ecosystem, and they have to be aligned, to some extent aligned, and aligned around growth. Not that they have to be aligned around growth, but if they are aligned around growth, a lot of good things can happen. It's useful, it's practical, it's effective and beneficial. So just a few things that we've learned from working with stakeholders as in the attempt to create more and more local firms that grow more and more rapidly is different stakeholders have different motivations. I mean, one of the big mistakes that we make when we talk about entrepreneurship policy is we treat job creation as the only outcome that's important, and it isn't the only outcome that's important. A lot more to say about that. But different stakeholders have different motivations. For bankers don't want jobs, they want a good loan book. Universities want jobs, but they want jobs for their alum, their graduates, because that allows them to compete for good students and other things. The politicians want good jobs, but they also want to get reelected and they want taxes to be paid. So there are different motivations, and we have to have a multidimensional dialogue around what the outcomes are in order to get the stakeholders involved. They won't be involved if their motivation, if their needs aren't addressed. Luckily, more and more local firms growing more and more rapidly has multiple benefits. It's very easy to show the universities how it benefits them. It's easy to show the governments how it benefits them. It's easy to show the larger companies. It's easy to show the media. So it's nice in the fact that it's easier to get the stakeholders involved. The alignment, as I said, has to be, or it's much more effective if it's around this one specific objective. So I have more to say about that, but maybe in the Q&A. And then finally, the fourth pillar is building sustainability into the process. I'm here just illustrating 6 different elements or components or building blocks of this sustainability. There has to be some kind of financial model. In other words, if you're making an investment, there has to be a model where that investment comes from and how it gets recouped. So that's essential. There has to be a mechanism for ongoing program development, for assessment, for broadening public engagement, and of course, governance in the way we talk about governance. So we're getting near the end. I just want to illustrate with one example. This is an example in a small, medium-sized city in the middle of Colombia. Nothing special. Well, there's something special about every place. but this is Manizales, Colombia. We created about 10 years ago a project with them. It's a city of 500,000 people, roughly, in the middle of the coffee district in Colombia. It's very beautiful, but lots of problems 10 years ago, corruption and natural disasters, and the former mayor in jail, and very, very high and growing unemployment, a lot of brain drain to the bigger cities. And 10 years later, implementing exactly these principles, there's been really a revolution in the city. It's grown on many soft dimensions of pride in the city, best place to do business, the number one in Michael Porter's social progress index in terms of income inequality and reduction in poverty. A lot of business growth, many, many companies growing, people now moving back from Bogota and Medellin and other countries and other cities rather to grow their business, because Manizales is known as the place you go to grow a company. And the whole cost of this has been about $5 million. So, and the fixed costs today are about $250,000. So it's always important to look at the denominator, not just at the return. How much did it cost? How did we get here? What kinds of resources are required? And in economic development terms, I think they're fairly limited. So just to come back to the beginning, I think what we started out to show that we could accomplish 11 years ago or so, 12 years ago by now, and that is, it is possible if you adopt certain ideas, certain concepts, you do certain things with certain methodologies. In fact, it is possible to make an impact on local societies in a way that the cities become stronger, the cities become more prosperous, the prosperity is broader based, and there's more excitement, there's more pride in the city as well. And these are all important. Again, I told you I'd mentioned this a few times. It's so powerful. More and more local firms growing more and more rapidly. We have projects now going all over the world, and I think it's simply an idea whose time has come. So with that, I will open things up. If we have a little time for discussion now, great. If not, I think I actually have used up 35 or 40 minutes out of 45. So I can give my time back to the conference, or we can use it for Q&A. I'm open to either way.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. This has been really inspiring to listening to you. It's absolutely mind-blowing of what you're saying, that there is actually a sort of formula for how to create scale up. What really triggers me, and I think that a lot of business owners that we know that we have in the audience, is obviously that, while you may have an existing business, it actually has a better chance of succeeding in scaling up. I think that's just a starting point to bring with us. And to that, and I'd just like to ask you to elaborate a little bit, because we're talking about smart regions and basically how to build smart, sustainable and prosperous environments. And you were saying towards the end, touching a little bit upon the notion that you have done this across the globe. So my first question is, does this formula, is it like the magic recipe? Does it work always, or have you encountered any failures? And if there are failures, how do you avoid those?
Well, yes, of course there have been failures. You don't learn very much if you don't have failures. Of course, especially earlier on, we've learned that the engagement of a small group of local stakeholders is absolutely essential. So in any community, there are 5, 10, 15 people / institutions that if they really want to make something happen, they can make it happen. And aligning them sounds like it'd be easy. It gets easier. The better we get it, and the more evidence we have. I mean, people tend to be evidence-based, not always, but evidence does help. The more evidence, the more willing they are to take that risk. And I think that that's a critical variable, and that's been I think that's the biggest challenge, is aligning a group of stakeholders around one idea. Not that they shouldn't do other things. If you have to do many things are important, but this is a unique activity. that has unique benefits. So
Okay.
primarily the failures have been in lack of the right kind of stakeholder engagement.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause and look at the questions from the audience. Let's see here. Well, there's a few things popping down. So I'll have to look deeper into this one a little bit more. But so another question that pops into mind, or actually is from the audience, is so we're going to meet with the mayor of Stockholm, Stockholm City, and Stockholm is often perceived and viewed as the unicorn factory, and there's many companies coming out of here. Given that we take pride, me being living in Stockholm, in that this is the unicorn factory, is that a risk? Is that something that you would say that, well, don't go down that route? I mean, instead, really try to think in another narrative?
Yes, absolutely. I think that unicorns are a wonderful phenomenon, and they're a market phenomenon and should be treated as a market phenomenon. But I think they should absolutely not be the stuff of policy, because they're by definition, they are a small group of investors getting extraordinarily wealthy. That's what it is. There's no evidence at all that the unicorns have an oversized positive impact on prosperity. No evidence that I know of anyway. In fact, a really wonderful study about 2 years ago was done of 137 unicorns. About that information was known, and it's published in the Journal of Finance, I think, and you can look it up. And it showed that with proper valuation techniques, half of the so-called unicorns would lose their unicorn status. In other words, a significant amount of the unicornness is a bluff. There's no other word for it. It's a bluff.
Wow, that's pretty bold words in these.
Not my words. My word bluff is, but you read the study. It's very compelling evidence.
So switching gears a little bit. So from the audience, given that we really do have emerging markets, and now we touched a little bit on Stockholm, we touched a little bit on the US, and from your experience, could you elaborate a little bit on the emerging markets? I mean, does this model work the same way, or does it have to be adapted, and how so?
Okay, everything has to be adapted. This is a methodology. It's not a blueprint. There's a difference. The methodology built on principles and tools, but I think most of our work is in what you call emerging low middle income economies, and so this has worked in Guatemala. It's worked in Colombia, and not in Bogota. It's a second tier city in Colombia. So the methodology was grown not only, but primarily. But it's also been used in Canada and the United States, which are more advanced economies. So,
so coming back to.
Excuse me for interrupting. If you don't have there are failed states out there. Thank God, not too many, but there are failed states out there in which this probably wouldn't work for many reasons. You have too much corruption and too much discord, or lack of safety, etc. I'm sure it wouldn't work, and there are more important things to do, maybe.
So one thing that the audience is curious about is also, you mentioned going out fishing, and you talked about the around communication, and you also earlier on talked about the scale up and from like legal seafoods being kind of old, traditional, and then switching. Is the role of the individual entrepreneur important, or is it more the team that is around him or her that matters?
Yes and yes.
And then you have to elaborate a little bit.
No, yes and yes. They're both. Everything's important. So first of all, it's not just the team; it's also the network. Entrepreneurship will happen anywhere, but for it to become a part of the system, so to speak, a part of the culture, there has to be multi-institutional involvement, intentionally or unintentionally. By the way, the fact that big companies Big companies are essential for entrepreneurship. Without big companies, you would never have entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean they intend to foster entrepreneurship, but their presence and the impact that they have on local economies, the flow of labor, the training of labor, the creation of supply chains, all kinds of things make them essential whether they intend to help or not. So it's not, I'm digressing a little bit, but one point that I think is a very important one to make, and that is you need the institutional involvement. You don't need the institutions to be explicitly fostering scale up entrepreneurship. You need their actions to foster scale up entrepreneurship. There's a lot of institutions that say they want it, don't do anything to help it, and vice versa.
Okay, and perhaps the final question for the final seconds of this one is from the audience again. Is it possible to apply this growth framework in regions or areas of political uncertainty and instability?
Well, it's a question of degree. The answer is yes. The question is how much political instability. And of course, the more instability there is, the harder it is to apply. No question about that.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a rewarding discussion and very much learning. And I'm going to turn it over to Sara, who's going to introduce our next speaker. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Isenberg. I thought that was fascinating to hear about the work you're doing and what you've been engaged in. And what we also wanted to do was to keep the questions kind of flowing through the chat. So if there's anybody who's reflecting on things, just keep passing the questions through. And we'll take these after the panel session, which we're going to move into now. While we kind of move into the panel session, can I also invite everybody to stand up and stretch your legs? Just a little bit. I'm conscious that everybody's been sitting for a while now. So what we will now do is move to present our next three speakers. And we are delighted and honoured to have the opportunity to work and engage with, first of all, Solomon Darwin, who's a business professor at the Haas School of Business at the University of California in Berkeley, and is appointed as the executive director of two key centres, the Garwood Centre for Corporate Innovation and the Centre for Growth Markets. He is also known as a visionary leader and as the father of what's known as the Smart Village movement. And Solomon is currently working with the government of India in developing scalable and sustainable smart villages. He's published 4 books to support his thesis. One, How to Create Smart Villages. The second one, How to Think Like the CEO of the Planet, Restoring the Declining Balance Sheet of the Earth. The third is The Road to Moray, the Smart Villages of Tomorrow. And the fourth is The Untouchables, 3 Generations of Triumph Over Torment. Do you want me to carry on doing the introductions? Or?
No, if you can.
So welcome, Solomon. Lovely to have you here today, and a pleasure to be working with you again.
It's great to be here. It's really early in the morning here in California.
So what time is it with you?
Oh gosh, it's 3:45 a.m. and California is also burning, as you know.
Yeah. Well, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us. It's lovely to have you here at Digital Day. So if we just start running through some questions, really, and see how the conversation goes, I think that would be lovely. So
sure.
In your book, you talk about the declining balance sheet of the Earth, and I'm familiar with your work over a number of years now as well.
Yes.
But what does this mean for you, and how can smart villages tackle this problem in your view?
Yes, the first book, The Declining Balance Sheet of the Earth, I was an accounting professor before I was an innovation professor. I taught accounting for 9 years. And before that, I was a corporate executive managing the balance sheet of Bank of America, Motorola, and a few others. So the thought occurred to me that when we are so much bent on stewardship of our companies, trying to grow the equity, and have someone accountable like a CEO who would come out and give an earnings release and be accountable to stakeholders, Why doesn't the Earth have a balance sheet? And who is the CEO of the Earth's balance sheet? Why isn't there an earnings release? Why isn't there a balance sheet, a report card, and an income statement for the Earth? So I just did that. This balance sheet of the Earth is a real one. There's a website. You can see the balance sheet with real assets, and they're declining. We are at 50% right now from the time that we got started due to destruction and abuse and overuse of Earth's resources. The stewardship of the planet isn't there is because there's no CEO. We have an absent CEO. However, all of the Earth's corporations increase their balance sheet at the expense of the Earth's balance sheet. So there's an exponential decline and an exponential increase, but there'll come a point in time the scales will tip, and we're on a sinking boat. And because we are unaware of it, there's a lack of awareness. And this book is written mainly to bring awareness among all the way from high schoolers all the way to adults and CEOs, because the book is written in such a way that a simpleton can understand it. All of the assets speak to you in first person, like the forests speak to you, like I am the lungs of the earth. I produce so much oxygen, keep you alive, and what happens if I'm damaged? So it is really very relatable. And every year there'll be a declining equity of the planet that people need to be aware around the world, and who's responsible. So that's the idea of that, of the Earth's balance sheet. And I can tie that in now into the smart villages too, which might be your next question.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, the link there, particularly, with sustainability and everything. But moving on to the next question, and you just mentioned the Smart Village movement as well. So how does the Berkeley Smart Village movement in India use scalability to improve the livelihood in regions?
Yes. One of the reasons that I am so passionate about the villages is there are 3.4 billion people on the planet who live in rural areas. And the other groups of people that live in urban areas, most of them live in slums. Most of our people in our villages in India, they go to Mumbai or Delhi or, live in ghettos and in very substandard places. So it is not a very good picture. So smart villages are really meant to bring in equity and equality and access and resources and tools to every person living on the planet at a very minimal cost. It doesn't take a whole lot of investment to empower someone digitally so that they could have access to markets like everybody else, cutting out all the middlemen and the red tape and so on. So these are pilots we're running in India, and I think we have been doing it for the last several years. So I truly believe that I think if the world is full of villages, we will have a much more of a sustainable planet, because we build so many things and there's so much waste and there's so much fossil fuel in there, because we do so much of this unnecessary work that just hurts our planet. But if the local regions of the world, where you sustain it and live off the land, so to speak, and still be connected, I think that it's a much happier place rather than to these cities. I used to teach at Berkeley. The first course on smart cities at Berkeley was taught by me. And I said, that's a disaster, because I was even invited by Prime Minister Modi to go to India, and my students went there to develop frameworks for smart cities. He promised 100 of them, and today we don't even have one. The problem with smart cities, that when our students went and started working on them, they're highly expensive. They're built on knowledge assets. Technology becomes obsolete very quickly. It's high maintenance. Today's technology is useless tomorrow. So the smart cities, as much as we think they are good, they eat up a lot of resources and they're not sustainable. While smart villages, it doesn't take much to empower people where they are and create much more of a happier, more harmonious environment. I think you have recently seen in COVID, under the COVID-19 environment, many millions of Indians living in cities, migrant workers, walk back home to their villages. Why? Because villages are the source of life. There's a river there, there's a lake there, there's food there. But you can't be sitting in buildings in Mumbai on 100th floor and food will come to you somehow, or water will come to you somehow. So people walk back, and many of them didn't make it because transportation was done. So it's a real lesson for us, this COVID-19, is that where our priorities are. And when I say smart villages, I don't mean, modernizing them. I just mean it's all about giving them some digital tools and access so people can be more connected, so they can have fair trade without all this middlemen and so on. And I think today that's possible.
And I find the whole smart village thing fascinating, but we know that, and we can carry on that conversation another time. But you've written a book about your personal life story, The Untouchables. And
Yes.
3 generations of torment over triumph. And I think it's a fascinating story and a fascinating book. But how does this story relate to your work, Solomon, on smart villages?
No, that's a good question. But first, let me define to you what I mean by a smart village. There are hundreds of definitions of what a smart village is. And a smart village, as far as Henry Chesborough, my colleague at Berkeley, and me define, we define a smart village as a community. It's people, a community empowered with digital technology, which is like cell phones and platforms and so on, that are easy, mobile, easy to use, no learning curve. So it is a community empowered by digital technology and open innovation platforms to access global markets. So smart villages is about building and empowering people, not infrastructure. We are not advocating build roads, build water tanks and all this. If you empower people, if you empower the human DNA, people themselves will rise to the occasion and build what is needed and what's essential, just what they need, not overdo it, so we're not taxing on the resources. So this brings me to my story. The reason, the story, the other book that I wrote, The Untouchables, 3 generations of triumph over torment, is the story, my own personal story, because I'm an untouchable. We are people who were less than human beings who were discarded into reservations or areas where nothing grew, and so people just starved because we are what we call paying for the sins of the past life. So this whole concept of smartness really was inspired by my grandmother, who was also an untouchable. She was a child bride at the age of 6, and she never knew her parents. There are so many girl children in their family. The father gave her away as a child bride to a man who was 20 years older than her. So she lived in this home as a slave for many years, in an untouchable home, having no hope, no access to resources. And she was at one time, since she was not able to bear children for the only son they had in the family, she went to her father, and the father said, well, I'm not going to accept you. You are a cursed woman. So she went and drowned herself in this river at the age of 40. But this is where empowerment comes in. So the book has 2 hands there. There's a hand that's coming out of the river, reaching out, and there's another hand that's coming down to lift her up. And that is the hand of an Englishman who was passing by and saw this beautiful woman being drowned. And he picks her up and he says, why are you dying? And she said, well, I have no hope. I have no purpose to live. I'm an untouchable. So he teaches her a couple of things. He teaches how to read and write, enough so much so that she was able to start a global business. This was a day when there was no FedEx, no email, no cell phones. She was a talented woman, so the Englishmen introduced her to some tradespeople in England. So she exported lace. She employed the entire village, so was the largest employer of the village. She also sold pickles. She pickled and exported them to Burma because it's British India. So, and then people trusted her, so people saved money with her. So she started a bank. And so she had 7 businesses going. So this is back when there was no email, no FedEx, right? And no cell phones. That is called empowerment. That's giving access, tools, and resources. Because the human DNA does not need a PhD. It does not need a high school. Just it needs opportunity and access. And once you empower the DNA, people will rise to the occasion and do great things. And that is what Smart Villages is all about. It is not building infrastructure, but it's building people. And that's the experiments we are doing in India right now. And we're in 3 states, 2 tribal states, Meghalaya and Arunachal up in the Himalayas, and then 1 in Andhra down there. And so we are hoping that we can prove to the world that this really works. And my own personal story is something that I am hoping would inspire other people. So here's a drumming woman, a wonderful DNA, right, just being discarded. But here's the opportunity comes in the right environment, she rises to the occasion. And with the monies from her business, she sends her children. At that time, she was so happy that she was able to bear children. And my father happens to be the first untouchable man in the southern India to get a PhD and come to the United States as a marine biologist and prosper here. And that's how I came here. So she believed in education. And so because that's what got her to where she was. And that's what we want to do. Education does not mean the traditional education and investment. So that is a story, quick story. There's a lot more in that book. We don't have time for all that right now, but it is just to sum up, that's what Smart Villages is all about.
And I find that also inspiring, that kind of hardship, the journey that she went through, your grandmother especially, what she's passed on to you, but also the kindness that came through from that period of her life as well, which seems to have transferred over to you as well. And I think that's particularly inspiring.
I think one of the beautiful things about that is because she has gone through that experience of hardship. She started the first orphanage. She started a house of refuge. She started a hospital. A refuge center. She fed the village. And she first donated the first school there, which I went to because the untouchables didn't have a school to go to. So, I went to a little dirt school in India, and I never thought one day I'll make it to Berkeley and be a professor here. So it's the story is remarkable, but it's not remarkable because it's an opportunity that we need to grant to every single person. And everyone has the same capability because we have the same DNA. The DNA is not much different.
And it's that empowering and transformation. I think you kind of touched on that very lovely there. Very lovely way. Okay, do you have anything you want to... I'm going to pass you on to Andrew.
So thank you, Solomon. It's been deeply inspiring. I feel I'm touched by what you're saying and the stories that you're telling, and I can see from the questions coming in from the audience, they are touched as well. So you made a mark. We're grateful for that. But obviously, we also have an audience that is really curious as well. And one of the questions that is coming is, so if they're asking if you could elaborate a little bit when you say sustainability, and we have the Smart Village movement. Might this be a way, or how do you see the connection with the challenges of resource depletion and staying within the planetary boundaries? Could you elaborate a little bit on your thoughts around that, sustainability, smart villages, planetary boundaries?
Yes, villages are more sustainable than cities because the cities really use up a lot of resources of the planet. we have, I think somewhere I read that we have about 100 trillion machines that use today. They're like what we call fossil slaves. We have replaced horses, human slaves into these things because they work 24/7. But little do we realize that the energy fossils that have created over millions of years is being used up so quickly, so fast. And because we wanted something for our greed so quickly that we didn't want to go and do it the natural way. In villages, people live very naturally. And I think if everyone lived in a village, there'll be much more of a natural to it and less driving around and using up all this energy. Even recently in COVID-19, apparently the water in Ganges is drinkable. You can see the beautiful Taj Mahal now. Why? Because we stopped driving. The world didn't end, but the thing is our greed gets in the way. And that is why there's a very famous statement that Jesus said, before you build, count the cost. If you build all these things that just are unsustainable, that take up a lot of energy, a lot of resources, you might be, well served in the short run, but in the long run, you're on a sinking boat. There'll come a point where, you used up all of that. So the worm in the apple ran out of food and the worm dies. So I think it's a different way of looking at it. So the cities are extremely expensive and villages are much more sustainable. And that's what in a few minutes I'll be talking to Prime Minister Modi on this very subject because he's into the cities. And my research shows that in order to sustain cities, you need villages. And he saw it with his own eyes when he saw millions of his people walking back when the trains were cut off and the planes were cut off and the buses were cut off, they walked back to their home. And actually, it's a real story. That's my grandparents in British India when they were in Burma, when the World War II, they walked all the way back from Burma to their own village in India because of sustainability. That's where the food is. That's where the source is. That's where the community is. That's where lineage and heritage is. So I think we just need to respect our planet. I think we respect, the stewardship of the planet. It's very, very important that we recognize that we are stewards of the planet and not really just there to like parasites on the planet.
I think that's once again very inspiring to hear how you're talking about the planet as a whole and how we are connected, both the cities but also the villages, because we're talking about how to build smart, sustainable, and prosperous environments, and that is really for the whole planet. So that it's going to be interesting because we're gonna shift gears a little bit. We're gonna refocus on the next speaker who is the mayor of Stockholm. So now we're going to move into the city focus. So it's going to be interesting to hear her thoughts on and angles as to what you just said, Solomon, I think. But thank you so much, and lovely to hear about your work and still touching or still being touched. So with that, switching gears, I'm introducing Anna König Jerlmyr. She has done a lot in her life. I am deeply impressed of what she has embarked upon during the last 10 years, namely really trying to create Stockholm into a better place. And she has now taken on the role of being the mayor of Stockholm since 2018. And it's not an easy task. There's a lot of viewpoints on that position and where Stockholm should be heading, particularly in Sweden, being a very, very big city. So we're going to allow a short introduction of Anna, and then I'm going to engage with the conversation with her. So here comes the presentation of Anna. Hello, Anna, and most welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to join this really important event.
Thank you, and we're glad to have you here, of course. So starting off, we're talking about smart regions and smart cities, and we're taking different angles to what that is. But for you personally, what comes to mind? What is a smart region? What is a smart city?
Actually, we in Stockholm were awarded a Smart City Prize last year, and it was because of the innovation we had in a city project where we planned a city with sustainable and innovative solutions, where we could see that we wanted to create jobs, we wanted to mitigate CO2 emissions with 60%. And in the end, where we used the technique with sensors and a strategic way of working together with the industry, we reduced heavy traffic by 90%. So just one example, how we trying to create a collaboration even more with academia, with the industry, with the city, because I think more than ever after the pandemic, it's really important to have visions. Often I look at Norway to be inspired with their visions about electricity and electrified airplanes and heavy traffic. But also, of course, Kigali in Rwanda that wants to be Africa's Singapore in 20 years and really working to achieve that goal. And for me, I want Stockholm to be the leading test bed where we actually try innovation and we implement it through innovation zones. And I hope that on a national level, they will let us allow the city to be this playground, this innovative place where industry, where researchers, and of course the city and the citizen could be active in trying to come up with the best solutions for our future challenges.
Wow, that sounds, it sounds almost like a dream, but it's actually, we're living in it right now. So one question that I immediately pops to mind is obviously that you are entering into a re-election phase in 2 years' time. And what you're talking about being visionary and being long-term and actually implementing all of these ideas and carrying them through actually calls for a longer time perspective. And so my question is, how do you deal with that? How do you manage to get basically the long-term view beyond the 4-year period, which sometimes you're entering into, which is a fact of life?
Yeah, it is difficult to be a politician because sometimes if you talk about visions, you will meet comments like, oh, I don't care about the visions, I need to do, what's the plan 2 years ahead? And then when you talk about this is the plan from now and 2 years ahead, they say, but where's the visions? And I'm trying to do both. But I think more than ever, as I said, it's really necessary to have the visions. Where should Stockholm be 2030, for example? Because if we know that the electric cars and buses and public transport are coming, then we need electricity, and then we need, collaborations to invest in that infrastructure. And it takes approximately 7 or 8 years. So my point is to the citizen that if we want to plan for Stockholm to have all these electrified solutions, so if we want 5G or if we want to be a climate positive city, we need to start today because it takes so long time to plan a city for that. But I think your question is really, it's very interesting, and it's really something that we have to discuss. But the technique today gives us the possibility to have real-time feedback with our citizens, with the end users through technique. Example, energy efficiency. If we use sensors, they can actually have feedback quite quickly. So it's not an abstract thing. It is actually they can see that we get a better indoor environment, and they can measure them for themselves. Or if we take health or elderly care, whatever, we can use the sensors to feedback the loops and have a communication throughout real data that is on a daily basis, rather than we have results that we are presenting to the citizens once a year. We can actually, introduce data from day by day. And I think that perhaps could be a way of making the citizen co-creators of the digital solutions and make them supportive, because I think people support what they help to create. And if they feel that they are involved, I could talk long about this, but one really good example is how London has worked with air quality. It is still very polarized debate here in Stockholm and Sweden, about people going by car or taking the bike, and is there good or bad air quality? But what they did was actually they put sensors on the backpack of the children. And suddenly, the Londoners could see that it's not a good air quality where my children are. So what will the politician do? So they're starting to create this giant demand that you have to improve air quality. And that's a totally different way of working together with the citizen to create solutions that both parts want.
It's really interesting, and in particular, I have kids myself, and working through the kids of achieving something, I think is pretty powerful. So that sort of guides us into the next questions from the audience. So given that we've achieved quite a bit in Stockholm so far, what is needed to really take the next steps to accelerate the movement that we are on, and really make sure that we're achieving the vision that you're outlining for 2030, but also towards 2040, 2045?
I think a lot needs to be done. I think that we need to work with technique today to invest in them. For example, if we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we need carbon capture and storage. I just had a meeting with the government about that today. But also, of course, that we need electricity. If we are heading through an Internet of Time area, and if we need 5G, then we need electricity. So 5G, electricity, but also talent. I think that talent is perhaps the main focus also for us as a city, because that is the future. It's the human capital that cities and countries are really struggling with to still maintain, but also to attract, of course.
Well, that's also interesting. We heard from Professor Solomon Darwin just speaking just before you came into the conversation. He talked about the importance of the villages, not the city by itself. That also the villages is perhaps even more important, that there's a symbiosis between the two. So given the movement that we have in Stockholm, what is it that Stockholm can offer as to the villages, and what can we learn from the villages as well?
I think we can have a really great collaboration. I mean, Sweden and Stockholm has a unique collaborate environment that we can actually, through digital solutions, also work and exchange ideas. And so I think that many of us who lives in Stockholm are coming from the village or a rural area. And we have families in the rural area. So we really care, and we are having a foot in each region, if you say. So I think that you will see that more and more about the collaboration and the technique that we can adapt and use between us.
And just as a segue into the next speaker, we have the Stockholm Food Waste Reduction Initiative that some of the audience may have heard of and some don't. Could you just very shortly elaborate a little bit on what is that and why is it so important?
Yes, food waste is not only a challenge in our city or in our country, but also a global challenge. And we use the food waste for district heating. So we collect it and we use it to heat up apartments in Stockholm, and so it's an ecosystem, if you say, and we are collecting it through automated solutions when we build new areas, but we also have really high ambitions when it comes to collecting food waste in our city. We are not there yet. We have high goals, but we're not reaching them yet. But now it's mandatory to collect food waste. And I think we have a little bit more to do there. As a mother of 3 growing boys that eat a lot, for me, I can see that the paper bags that we use are so small that I think that could be improved, that we ask the industry, could we find better solutions so that families also in apartments could have better products, just to be user-friendly. And that's another example. So many times when the public sector or the city have different initiatives, we tend to do it from top down. We don't ask the end users about their needs, about how we can help them to be even more climate friendly or to be more active when it comes to energy efficiency and so on. But I think that we need to start there. And I think we have the best possibilities in the city with so many early adopters. But sometimes as a public administration or politician, we forget the citizens, we forget the end users and their needs. And we need to ask them first before we innovate.
All right, wonderful, Anna. Thank you so much, and we'll bring that question with us to asking the users, because we're now going to meet a digital entrepreneur, or could also be named the managing director, Ludvig Anderberg from Mat.se, which is an environmentally friendly online food store, and I'll leave it to the technicians to introduce him a little bit more. Here's Ludvig. So welcome, Ludvig. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
We are waiting to see you on the screen. We just have your frozen face still. But anyhow, we're going to get started. Mat.se, 2 questions. What is it, and why is it so important, would you say?
What Mat.se is that the question?
Yes. For the ones in the audience that we have people coming in globally, so they might not know about Mat.se. So just the short version of what it is. But then perhaps the more important question is, why is it so important?
Yes. Okay. Mat.se is a Swedish e-commerce player in the grocery industry. We are owned by a large Swedish corporation called Axfood, and what we are doing and what our unique offer is that we offer the customers a way of knowing their climate impact when they're buying food from us through their CO2 equivalent numbers on different products. So we have an individual product marking on about 3,000 of our products in an assortment. And so the customer actually also get sort of a climate receipt when they're buying from us. So yeah, that is what, and we are completely unique, I would say, in Sweden definitely, and most likely also in the world, actually, providing that information to the customer.
And I think that's a very, how should I put it, a unique offering that you're putting through. And then you said that also we just haven't found this in any place else in the world. So if you were to spread this across the globe, I know this might be a very bold question, but I take it because you're an entrepreneur. Where would you start, and why? Because we talked about why it's important, but where would you start in other regions? Could this be made elsewhere, or is it just here that it works?
No, I think it could be made everywhere. I think what we are trying to do is actually educating the customer. We don't want to tell the customer exactly what choices that they should do when purchasing their groceries, but we want to provide them with the transparency and saying that, okay, if you compare this, to take some really harsh examples. If you compare red steak to a carrot, here's the climate or the CO2 equivalent impact that you affect with your purchase, so to speak. But you make the choice as a customer. That's important to say. It's always the customer that makes the choice. But our information, and when we talk to customers, we know that 80% of our customers, they want to buy more sustainable food and help the climate change in a positive way by buying sustainable food. So we know that the willingness is there, but what we are doing is just providing a tool for the customers. I don't see why this shouldn't be used everywhere, so to speak.
No, I agree. I think that it definitely should. But then we have the challenge, and I'm going to be a bit challenging to you now, because we know that there are always innovators that sort of jump onto this. Wow, this is amazing, and this is exactly in line with my life. The main challenge is when you if in startup terms, when you scale it up, or when you get from the early adopters to the late adopters, and really get everybody engaged in this sort of almost like a conversation.
Yeah.
How are you reasoning around that? Because I think this must be in the back of your head. How do we get more engaged in this important task?
Well, I think it's a matter of making the information available, actually, and talking a lot about it, and also providing inspiration of how easy it is. And we are not saying that we don't want all our customers to be vegetarian. That's not the purpose of this, but we want to make it or show the customer how easy it is to make just small steps and take small steps. If you change, or when you do your pasta bolognese, for instance, you use minced meat, but if you also add on chickpeas in that recipe, you can take half of the amount of minced meat that you used before and add on chickpeas instead. Then all of a sudden you have almost half the climate impact that dish will have, and you probably won't feel much of a taste difference by doing that, and that also makes it very tangible for the customer and for the people on how do I change my climate impact. So it's, I think, one of the easiest way that we actually have is by just changing a little bit on how we eat to make a huge impact, and it's a real impact in day-to-day life.
So I love the idea. We started to talk about that very early on in the conversation around the importance of the individuals. Yes, we can leave it to the government, but it's also the individual. And you're touching upon exactly that question. And to build upon that, we have the issue around food sustainability. And Anna, the mayor of Stockholm, just before you talked about the transportations, for instance, and the logistics. And that is a major thing in your operations. How do you reason around smart solutions when it comes to transportation? Because it's going to be an inherent part, not only the cooking in itself.
No, of course, and we are looking at new solutions also for transportation. Of course, we will be developing into electrical vehicles going forward. But I also think we need to look at other solutions in terms of co-transporting between different industries and different actors in the market, to make sure that we have a good that the trucks that we're driving are full, so to speak, and we're not driving around with empty trucks. That is one thing. The tricky thing for the grocery industry is that we need cooling systems everywhere we take our products. And also, I think we can look at solutions for drop-off points where we do not take all our products back to the residential areas, but we could deliver to workplaces and so on and so forth to decrease the amount of transportation needed in total.
Okay, thank you, Ludvig. It's been an interesting and very inspiring conversation, and I think that you really touched upon that there are definitely things that we as individuals can do by ourselves, just changing behaviors a little bit. We're going to open up the floor for more open conversations with all of our speakers that we have engaged with earlier. So I'm going to see if the technicians can get them up on the screen so we can see who's in the room, and in particular, you guys who are watching and also asking questions. We would like to have a larger conversation. So let's see if we can get the speakers up so we see who's with us online, if that's possible.
While we're doing that, can we just pose a question to the audience as well? So if you were to tweet about the future of smart regions, what would you say? So if you were to tweet about the future of smart regions, what would you say?
All right, so let's. We had a tweet, and it's rolling and it's coming. We are sitting here with our iPads, getting the questions pouring in. We want to start us off. There seems to be a few questions, in particular. We're going to start with Daniel, going back to where we started some minutes ago. So there is a question around the challenge of purpose and profit, and things are popping up around social innovation. Is there, from your experience, Daniel, creating this scale up, when you sort of scale up the entrepreneurial ventures, how do you reason around of actually benefiting society while at the same time making a profit? Have you encountered that, and how do you think around the scale-up movement?
Well, obviously that's a big question, and smart people debate that, and I'm not going to pretend to have the total answer, but I think the scale-up ecosystem approach intrinsically is broad-based. It's built on the bulk of companies growing, not some elite companies growing extraordinarily well. So in that respect, it intrinsically mitigates against some of the externalities that we see when you'd see a few people getting really wealthy, such as with the unicorns and so on. So I think that is a built-in safeguard to some extent. Doesn't solve all the problems.
All right, thank you. We're gonna ask a similar, but a little bit with a twist to Ludvig from the audience. Because you said that we want to sort of prompt or sort of nudge the customers to do good when or make it easy to buy better in some sort of way. How are you working with algorithms to optimize grocery ordering depending on sort of the climate impact that they have, and not only for the food as itself, but the whole chain with including transportation? Are you working anything actively with that, and could you elaborate a little bit on how you do that?
We are not in the supply chain. We are not working with algorithms from that perspective. We are working with algorithms and AI when it's based on what customers are usually buying and that sort of thing, and trying to support the customers in that way. So our AI work is now mainly focusing on the customer perspective.
All right. Thank you. Sara?
I've got a question here which I'll direct towards Anna first, and then Solomon. I think we'll get two kind of nice and contrasting views. But Anna, if I start by asking you, so what are the policies that are needed so that smart regions can emerge and thrive in your view?
I think we need brave leaders, both on a local level, but of course on a national level. We have still many regulations that hinder us from innovative environments. So that's why I want that World Expo 2040 is established here in Stockholm, because then they talk about these collaborative environments, this test bed, and also innovation zones. And I think that is one example that the national level gives us opportunity to test new solutions in the city and permits us to do this, in spite that they perhaps are not fully in line with the national regulations. We talk a lot about innovation zones here in Stockholm, that we need more of them. I know Toronto is one example, but I think that we are many cities that wish for that kind of reforms.
Thank you. And Solomon, if I can direct that question to you now as well. So what are the policies that are needed so that smart regions can emerge and thrive, in your view?
One of the things we are doing in India is all of the villages, and when we have about 60 companies working in India, many of these are global companies. But one of the things that I established is that we all have to work together as an ecosystem. An ecosystem, your human body that you have is an ecosystem. It only produces what it can use, and it recycles its waste. It sustains itself. The problem with human beings is that we overproduce something and we do a lot of waste. And in smart villages, everyone has to fit into an ecosystem, so they use the same supply chain, same resources in a sharing economy way. And we're doing the same thing with data. Right now, we're saying data is the new oil, but we only use 5% of the data we produce. We're overproducing it. Data is like oil in the ground. It needs to be located. It needs to be collected. Needs to be refined. It needs to be packaged. It needs to be distributed, and it needs to be consumed. If no one is going to consume it, it's totally useless. So same thing with data too. I think we need to find ways, whatever we produce, it is consumed, right? So data is totally useless unless it is converted into information, which tells us about patterns and trends. And information is also totally useless unless it is converted into knowledge, because knowledge tells you what to do. But knowledge is also useless unless it is converted into a solution, like technology or a process. It tells you how to do it. But technology is also useless unless there's a business model over the value to create the value. But a business model is also useless. It's driven by greed sometimes, unless it's scalable. You need to capture that value to promote growth, organic growth. And scalability is also useless unless it is sustainable. You can't really scale something and it's not available to everyone else. You need to help everyone else out. It needs to be sustainable. And scalability should not become what some of your guests was talking about. Scalability should never become the enemy of sustainability. Otherwise, we pollute everything, and that's what we're doing right now. So it's poor stewardship, and we destroy the planet. So scalability should not become the enemy of sustainability. That's what I would tweet if I were to tweet something. But sustainability is also totally useless unless it makes people happy. There are a lot of rich people in this world who have a lot of wealth. They don't need anything. They have enough money that the interest will take care of them, but they are totally unhappy, right? So that's the whole idea of why we're on this earth, is to be happy. And I think we need to be driven not by greed, but by an ecosystem approach that we're using in India. It's a very harmonious way of working together and sharing.
Thank you. I'll pass you back to Anders now.
All right, so very interesting, and the audience is extremely active right now, and in particular, I think that there was something that Dan said, and there was something that Solomon said. So I'm going to ask the same questions. Solomon, you're going to go first, and then Dan will come after. So the question is like this: when both of you are talking, do we hear that we have underutilized growth capacity? And then you can elaborate a little bit on what growth capacity is. I assume that's underneath it. But do we have underutilized growth capacity? And the second question, follow-up questions, are the government and the boards setting the expectations right? So Salomon, would you like to start us off with this question? And then Daniel?
Well, I believe that growth has to be organic and very purposeful. I went to a very interesting place in India up in the Himalayas. It's called Zero. And the chief minister, gave Berkeley some money and some companies to come and make those villages smart. And we went to this one place called Zero and found the happiest people there on earth. Very, very happy. And we told them, you're doing such great work and great produce. Why don't you multiply it and make more money? They said, we are not. We just want to grow enough just for ourselves. And we don't even want to sell it to our neighbors because we have enough. And I came back to the chief minister and said to him, sir, you wanted me to bring in a lot of technology and companies and exploit all these resources to make people happy. But those guys are so happy right now with that energy. They don't want any of this. But the chief minister said, I have a mandate from the prime minister to increase the GDP of the state. See, that's a problem, is that, a lot of this stuff happens because of human greed. And I think when we are talking about organic growth, we just produce enough to consume enough to keep things going. And that's better stewardship.
Thank you. Daniel, what would your take be on the question on underutilized growth capacity and are the perhaps government, but more importantly, so the boards, are they setting the right expectations?
So just to be very brief, absolutely there's unrealized growth potential. Just in Sweden, our rule of thumb, okay, this is very rough. There's probably 10,000 companies, and I can explain the math very easily, maybe 5,000 to 10,000 companies that could grow 10% faster with a little bit of support and a little bit of training and the right kind of culture and support. I don't mean giving money, but support, a lot of it is soft support. And that's, I've done this exercise all over the world, and that's what I call immediately achievable growth potential. You can do the arithmetic in terms of what that means for taxes and jobs and wealth creation and all the other good things. So the answer is everywhere in the world, yes, there's underutilized growth. And one of the problems at the governance level is nobody that I know of, and maybe nobody's too strong a word with 8 billion people or so in the world, but no leader I've ever seen talks about real growth, real companies, lots of them growing a little more all the time. Nobody talks about it. And it's such a simple message.
Well, I absolutely love the conversation that we're having here, don't you, Sara? I think it's very, I think we're getting because we were talking about how to build smart, sustainable, and prosperous environments and using digital innovation sort of as a foundation. So we're getting many angles to this. This is not easy to say, that's for sure. So, Sara, back to you.
Yeah, I'm watching all the tweets coming in from the audience as well, which is fascinating. I've got a question now for Ludvig. So in what ways can business leaders inspire employees, do you think, to engage in the innovative process? And how long would you say it might take to see real progress in a smart, sustainable and prosperous way?
I think we have, as business leaders, we have a very important role to play, both towards our employees and our internal organizations and to our customers particularly. We can, in the industry that I'm working with, which is the grocery industry, we can really show the way through this. The grocery industry, looking back, I mean, we are very good at actually changing people's behavior. We do it every time we introduce new products in our grocery stores. And we have done that for many years. And if we can sort of apply the same principles and same solutions also for showing people what is the right way to go when it comes to sustainability and other positive developments, so to speak, in where we can affect society. And how long it will take, I think for me it starts today. It starts, I mean, it starts where we are standing today. We can make small steps in the right direction. I think that is the most important thing than rather than to hope for giant leaps of development. We have shown that we can affect our customers' behavior with our sustainability marking of our products, and we clearly see declining climate impact from the products that the customers are buying. So it starts today and where we are standing today.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Quite like the fact that, you know, it's from now as well. I'm going to pass you back to Anders.
Yeah, so it's a few questions coming for Anna. So the first question is obviously, Anna, because you were talking about being in the forefront, being very inspiring. Where do you get your inspiration from? Which city, or rather perhaps cities, do you see being in the forefront of smart cities globally, and how do you engage with these cities?
I often find examples in every city I'm in and visiting and talking to find examples, but I'm trying to connect Stockholm as quite a small city globally, from a small country, to an international network. Because more than ever, especially when it comes to sustainability, we need to collaborate with other cities around the world. And that's why I'm active in the C40 climate network with large cities as Dhaka, as LA, as a lot of cities from Africa, Asia, just to talk about what actually we can do to fulfill the Paris Agreement, but also real operative measures in our cities that we can learn from each other. And also the networks among mayors, we are building up a lot of networks now that we are meeting, not during the pandemic only, but also economic effects. How can we restart our economy? And something that everyone is discussing is how can we restart our economies in a sustainable way? So I think so many are aware of we can't do as we always have done. We have to do it more with the consciousness of being so much more ambitious when it comes to reducing the CO2 emissions. So especially in the Nordic region, our focus is on sustainable solutions. And I see also the investments are coming now to the Nordic region because we are so focused on that. But as I said, like cities like Kigali is very much inspiring about their vision, but also cities that work a lot with universities and are also trying to connect them. So we now have a lab in Stockholm with MIT and researchers there, together with KTH here in Stockholm and the city, to work with how can we integrate people more in the city? What kind of environments make places interactive with people from different backgrounds? And what can we do to stimulate that kind of places? Because after the corona, we can see that the cities are often segregated. But what is the things that make places integrated? And how can we build more of these places in the open society? So that's just one example. There's many more, but we're trying also to get collaboration with other universities around the world.
So I hear you talk a lot about the issue of a community and building a strong community, and that sort of implicitly can call for investments. is there a dark side to this? Is there a risk that might block or limit the ability of people to de-urbanize and that sort of we are exploiting the villages or the smart villages?
Solomon, that's a... Yeah.
And I'll direct it first to Anna, and then I'd like to hear Salomon's view on that as well.
It could be, but though I see that the entrepreneurs here in Stockholm are now scaling up in Africa.
Yeah.
And the purpose is just to make it more accessible to people. And we now more and more talk about impact entrepreneurs. So I see that, I mean, it's not only about profit, and it is about impact for the good. And that's what drives them. So that's why we can see that scaling is today not only Stockholm and other cities around Sweden or Norway, actually like Stockholm and then a lot of other cities in Africa, for example, or South America. And I think that is that's something that is really important to build on, and it's to make it accessible to a lot of people. So
Solomon, very briefly, what's your view on with the sort of the focus that sometimes happens in the cities, but could that block or limit the ability of the smart villages movement? You have to unmute yourself, or you're...
I need to, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, all right. There are a couple of things we're doing in India that are very, very important. Now, people being in villages, it doesn't mean they cannot contribute to the global economy. Now we're teaching young people. We have 600 million young people in India. 48% of them live in villages. So Salesforce, AWS, Autodesk, all these large companies, Microsoft, they're teaching our young people without traditional education on mobile devices how to code, how to speak, how to write through gaming. They learn much faster, much better than the traditional teaching where kids, where the teacher doesn't even show up. So here they form their own groups. And now, Salesforce, for example, not only teaches kids how to code and do the programs, but also it tests them, it certifies them, and places them in jobs, and they work right from the village. They don't have to go to Mumbai and live in a ghetto someplace. So it's the whole dynamic is, I think what we need to do is build more villages in the world rather than more cities. You know, I think if you look at the old Levitical law in the Old Testament, you know, God who created the heavens and the earth, he said, you know, he never promoted cities, he promoted villages, because of the fact is it's much more earth friendly. And that is what I would definitely promote is that with the digital infrastructure that we have now, I think this is very much possible.
Thank you. So we're getting into the final, the closing statements. I think that this has been a really interesting conversation. As we said, we might not have all the answers, but we definitely want to have different views on challenging questions as well. So we asked the audience to tweet around the future of smart regions and what would you say? If I'm going to start with Anna being a politician and being able to say something in 10 seconds or so, sorry for me, my bluntness, but what would you say is the future of smart regions?
Yeah, I just got a question before, but I would say it's about creating a region where the visions of today becoming the reality of tomorrow, that includes a welcoming, inclusive way of implementing innovation and benefits for the society as a whole. That's a proper politician's answer.
Wonderful. And from the entrepreneur and the digital innovator, Ludvig, what would be your take on actually the same question? What would you say are the future of smart regions?
I think actually what is needed going forward is to get the grassroots level really into the development of sustainable development of the smart regions, because that's where you really make an impact.
Thank you. And I'm going to continue on the conversation and Daniel, you get the same question as well. What would you say is the future of smart regions?
Well, there will be no future of smart regions unless there is a broad base of growth in the regions. And that broad base of growth is essential. It's not the only thing, but it's without that, you won't have the resources to accomplish other really important social objectives.
Thank you. And finally, Solomon, what would you say is the future of smart regions?
Well, I will echo what Daniel was saying. You know, scalability should not become the enemy of sustainability. Then we don't have a future, and sustainability is also is useless unless it makes people happy. I think that's what I would tweet. Wow,
thank you. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. I think that at least I have learned quite a bit. Very inspiring, broadening perspectives, challenging perceived truths to some extent. Sarah, any final words on your part?
I think just to say a very big thank you to our speakers for the fascinating session, but also thank you to the audience for all your help and support in making this happen. You're very much a part of that. And I'll now pass you over to Katarina.
So we're passing it on to Katarina, who will do the very final remarks. Katarina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sara, Jack, and Anders Richtnér for moderating this session. And again, thank you to all speakers who've been logging in from everywhere, and to our very engaged audience. It really is a pleasure to see you all engage online with us. We are almost ready for a break again, but before that, I'd just like to draw your attention to the next and final module of the day. It's not the final part of the program, but it is the last module, the third one, and it will deal with smart organizations. So now we are moving very close to the people side of things. We will talk about building resilience, readiness, and agility, and look at new ways to lead, how organizations can empower employees to be active in the digital transformation that is going on in their organizations, and also at the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. So we encourage you to take a good break, but stay connected, and we'll see you again at 2:30.